Good evening. I'm Jim, and I'm an alcoholic. I kind of having an emotional day. I get frustrated easily with things. Nothing traumatic has happened, but I get frustrated easily, and it affects my attitude. So I'm glad to be here in a meeting of AA tonight, and hopefully you guys will help me alter my attitude. AA, alter my attitude. So that has been a problem for me throughout my life. My sobriety date is 8/1/93, August 1st, 1993. So I'm just coming up on my 24th birthday here. So I've got 23 years of continuous sobriety. Getting back to the emotional distress I've found throughout my life, I think the difference is that I found a solution to that in Alcoholics Anonymous. Before I had no solution, and when my emotions flared, which they often do, and they still do, the solution for me was to drink. That worked. That quelled my emotions. And so I guess what AA has given me today is a choice. I can still drink, and it would probably work. I'm sure it would. But I have a choice today. I can apply these steps and connect with a higher power in my life today and be able to reduce the emotions enough that I can have some serenity and peace in my life today. And for that, I thank AA. So anyway, I haven't got a lot of time, but I'd like to tell you how I got here, briefly, what happened, and what my life is like today. Now, I'm 74 years old now, and so it was late in life when I first got sober. And I had been around, and by the way, welcome to the new people. And when I don't want to go into a long drunkalogue, but I had ruined almost everything in my life by the time I got here. I had walked away from good jobs, been fired from good jobs, drifted from town to town, looking for new opportunities, hoping things would be different, and they never were. In the late 1970s, my son had gotten sober, and I went to an AA meeting to check it out for him. I had no intention of going myself. And I want to warn you, if you're new, one AA meeting can ruin things for you real quick. And that's what happened to me. I don't know what somebody said. I don't know what I heard. Maybe you'll hear it tonight. But I knew that you guys had something I wanted or I needed. I wasn't quite sure what. I had decided that I was going to Southern California. I always wanted to be in Southern California. So I went down to the local Harley-Davidson dealer, and I bought an old police trade-in bike. I went home, fixed it up, got on it, and rode it all the way to California. It took me 5 days to ride that old thing from Milwaukee, Wisconsin to Los Angeles. It rained every day. I didn't have any front fender. I didn't have any goggles. I didn't have anything. I just rode through the rain for 5 solid days and nights on this mission that I had no idea what was going to happen. I got here, and I remembered that AA meeting, and I thought, gee, there's something about that AA thing. I think I'll go check it out again. And so I ended up in Laguna Beach. I looked in the directory. There was a meeting at the Canyon Club, the old Canyon Club. And so I drove my car down there. It was a Saturday night meeting, much like this, and I had a speaker. And in those days, you could smoke in the meetings. It was full of smoke. They turned out all the lights, and there's 2 red cylindrical lights that hung by the podium, and it was like a seance in effect. And I thought, well, this guy is reading my mind. I was identifying with somebody else that was an alcoholic. I thought nobody knew how I felt. Nobody knew how I felt. And I heard it from the podium, how somebody else knew how it felt like I did. And so I hung around AA. I had stopped drinking, but that's all I did. I didn't understand that you weren't supposed to use drugs here to remain sober, and so I continued looking for a substitute for alcohol. When those emotions took off, I knew I needed something, and I thought, well, I better not drink again because that didn't work out well for me. But if I can find some cocaine or marijuana or something else, I'll try that and see if I can use that to maintain myself. That way I'll still be sober. I'll still be sober. I believe that. And so I did. But interesting enough, I tried a lot of different things. Nothing ever worked like alcohol. Nothing ever worked like alcohol. And so the frustration, I continued to come here, proclaim I was sober, although I was still using drugs. And finally, my son ended up moving out here, thought I should get a sponsor. And so he picked out a guy for me. And this fellow happened to be a physician. He was in recovery. He was a physician. And so he became my first sponsor. And he explained to me as a physician about the disease of alcoholism, and that it was a chronic, debilitating, progressive, and then fatal disease. So I took that very seriously. And I thought, well, geez, this guy is a doctor. Why doesn't he have a medical solution for this disease if this is a disease? And so I asked him that very question. He says, well, there is no medical solution, but AA has a spiritual solution to this medical problem, which really probably doesn't make much sense to anybody, and it didn't to me at the time either. But I followed his direction. I worked the steps with him. We became very close. And I decided one day that I was suffering from depression. I was depressed. And so I thought, well, this is great. My sponsor is a physician, so I'll just go to him and I'll have him write me a prescription for my depression. And so I went to him one day and I said, Paul, I'd like to have you write me a prescription for my depression. I'm depressed, you see. And he said, well, I don't believe in drugs. And I said, how can you be a doctor and you don't believe in drugs? And he says, it isn't that I don't believe in them, but I believe in them as a last resort. And so I try to find a spiritual solution to people, for people when they come to me and say they're depressed. And he said, I suggest you start exercising. And I thought, exercising? That doesn't sound very spiritual to me. But it turned out that it was. It became an action that I took that I didn't think was going to work, that did work. And so I started exercising, and I still do today, and I run. And that's part of my 11th step. It became part of my 11th step. In other words, I do my prayer and meditation while I'm running and exercising. And so I was able to integrate that into my 11th step. And so it worked wonderfully. It's worked all these years, and so my health has been restored. When I came to you guys, I'd had a number of heart operations. I developed onset diabetes. I was way overweight. I was depressed, of course, and today, here I am, all these years later. The depression has subsided. The heart problems are now undetectable, although I still have heart disease. If I stop doing what I'm doing, I could certainly have problems again. The onset diabetes is undetectable, although it's in a remissive state. It could surface again if I were not to take care of myself. So I look at it this way. Being 74 years old now, I feel like I'm getting younger rather than older as a result of being, you see, because my life was going down so fast when I got here, and now it seems to be going in the other direction. And so I feel vibrant, healthy, youthful. I do things. I go out and I run 3 miles. I couldn't do that when I was 35 years old. And so I have my health again. But most important, I want to talk just brief. I don't know how much time I got left here, but anyway, I want to talk a little bit about the steps because they've been such an impact in my life. I think for me, in the first step, I'm powerless over alcohol, and as a result of that, my life has become emotionally unmanageable. Now, the idea of being powerless over alcohol, that's one problem. That's a problem. But that's a substance problem. And but having the result of that being this emotional unmanageability that I found in my life as a result of that, that's a whole different thing. That's a disease of alcoholism. And so I'm able in that first step to separate the substance from the disease. They're two different things altogether. Stopping drinking was easy for me. I stopped drinking lots of times. It didn't make things better at all. In fact, it made things worse. And so again, I would return to drinking to find some sanity in my life. And so my sponsor today has explained to me that, alcohol was really never my problem. It was a solution to my problem. I used it to keep myself mentally sane. And so today I have these steps to keep me intact. And so when I was new, I remember hearing people talk about spiritual experiences and spiritual awakenings, which I thought were pretty much the same thing. I didn't see any real difference at all. And so I thought, well, this is a good opportunity to call my friend, Father Terry, because he's as close to the source as he could be, and he'll explain the difference to me between a spiritual awakening and a spiritual experience. So I called him up and I said, Terry, this is Jim, and I said, I'm relatively new and I've heard you speak, and I wanted to talk to you a little bit about spiritual matters because you're a priest and all that. And so he said, well, fine, I'll try to help you. And I said, well, what I don't understand is the difference between a spiritual experience and a spiritual awakening. And so we had a discussion. I don't remember exactly what we went into, but he finally came with a quite surprising answer. He said, there isn't any difference. There's no difference whatsoever, except for one thing, the awareness of the individual. And I thought, that's quite profound. I couldn't believe it. I thought, that's right. When I was new, when I came here, I knew this spiritual, this is not just an AA meeting, it's a spiritual environment, a spiritual gathering that we have here. I didn't know I was having this spiritual experience. I was unaware of it. And if you're new, you're probably not aware of it either. And so that's why we keep telling newcomers, keep coming back until you become aware that something spiritual has happened. And so certainly there's people that have these dramatic spiritual events, and they become aware immediately of what's going on. But the same thing is going on with people that aren't aware of it, and so when they come back, they ultimately do become aware of it. And so that's what happened to me. I kept coming back. I exercised, which I never thought would do anything for me. I worked the steps. I had commitments at meetings. I sponsored people. I went with my sponsor everywhere. None of those actions I ever, in my wildest imagination, ever considered to be spiritual actions. But as today, Father Terry told me one other thing I always like to share too, that he told me. Before we ended that conversation, he said, Jim, you cannot witness your own spirituality. You cannot witness your own spirituality. when it's happening. You can after it's happened, but not while it's happening. And so as I reflect back on my early experiences in AA, those actions that I took at the direction of a sponsor, at the direction of AA and my higher power, which are all, I guess, interwove, are now all seem very spiritual to me, being of service to somebody else. I never thought I was being of service. I was just doing what I was told. A spiritual act, exercise. First, I didn't think that was spiritual at all, but it became part of my 11th step. Now it's all spiritual. I don't look at it as exercise. I look at it as spiritual activity or 11th step action. And so as I look at the steps, it seems that they require action to make them work. In other words, I read about the steps a lot of times. It didn't do me any good at all. But when I started taking action relative to those steps, things began to work. Things began to change. Sobriety began to blossom. And so I have, I don't know how to explain it, but I have this force in my life today, this spiritual force in my life today that I can tap into via the steps, prayer and meditation, taking actions and so forth. But in the 12th step, I knew that the definition of sobriety here in AA certainly wasn't stopping drinking, because stopping drinking just made me miserable. I don't know what it does for you, but the insanity they talk about in the second step came to believe that a power greater than myself could restore me to sanity. Well, that sanity, that insanity wasn't when I was drinking. That insanity is when I wasn't drinking. Certainly I acted bizarrely when I drank. That was bad behavior, but the insanity that I experienced is when I wasn't drinking. I couldn't maintain myself for very long periods of time when I, again, had to return to drink to quell those emotions. And so the point of this is that sobriety, for me, needed a definition. And certainly stopping drinking was not it. That's not sobriety. That's dryness. And so as I listened to my sponsor and others in AA, it became apparent that sobriety is a spiritual condition. Certainly you have to stop drinking. That's the ante to get in the game. But the game here is the 12 steps. But sobriety, a spiritual condition. And it says in the 12th step, as I read it, I don't know how you read it, but it says, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps. Well, it seems pretty clear to me that if I've had a spiritual awakening, I'm in some kind of a spiritual condition. And so that's what I like, how I like to define sobriety, a spiritual condition. You know, this God-given power to be sober, to have this peace and serenity in my life today where I don't have to drink, very simply. And so I want to, again, welcome the new people and keep coming back here to become aware of what's happening here. Get involved, make some friends, get a sponsor if you want, but get involved in this thing. I for so many years I just hung around the outsides. I used to go to the Canyon Club and I'd stand in the doorway. I'd get there late and I'd stand in the doorway and I'd look through that smoke and listen to the speakers, and then I'd get the hell out of there before you guys tried to shake my hand or talk to me or anything. I wanted nothing to do with you. And so nothing happened. As I went to meetings, I felt better for periods of time, but there was no recovery going on. There was no momentum to recovery. But when I made some friends, I got a sponsor, I got involved, got a commitment, all of a sudden everything changed. My whole attitude changed. My perception changed. And so I was able to become a part of Alcoholics Anonymous. You know, I can't say I'm proud to be an alcoholic. that wasn't my doing, really, but I'm certainly proud to be a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, you know, and be a part of this fellowship and be able to be a service to somebody else in my life rather than this selfish self-centeredness that just dogged me for my whole life. All I could think about was me, and you get the hell out of my way and don't get between me and the bar. And you know, I don't have that anymore. I mean, it's been had a lid put on it, and so I have this serenity in my life I can share with somebody else. And you know, Sally and I have a relationship today. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it ain't so good. But nobody's taken a drink yet, and we work through our problems, and we use the principles we learned here to do that. And so I want to thank you all, and thank Steve for having me tonight, and I hope you all have a nice weekend. Thank you.